Hey everybody, Rex Bear League Project. How the heck are you? I watched Guardians of the Galaxy 2 last night, and I want to give a quick analysis on it. Now, this is definitely going to be a spoiler, so if you haven't seen the film yet and you don't want to know about it, go ahead and watch something else. For those of you that do want to see the connections that I saw with the cult of Saturn, with nanotechnologies, with transhumanism, with Cronos, the god of time, it's pretty deep. It was definitely far out, and it seems like when I watch these films, I watch them at certain times after I've done research in other avenues to kind of connect the dots. And the first thing that I noticed in the film was the all-seeing eye. That was a ship. It was a demigod's ship, and it was Kurt Russell that played this demigod. And at the beginning of the film, he's going to different planets and seeding his life essence essentially, and he's having sex with all sorts of different women. And I'm thinking of the stories that are talked about when the fallen angels come down to earth and have sex with women. So he's considered a celestial, a demigod, and he actually even builds his own planet based on thoughts alone. He thinks it into manifestation. He actually manifested his body. And remember how I brought up a couple of days ago about on a podcast about how I felt like we were manifested via thought forms, not by a single cell. So that was interesting also. And so one of the main characters, one of the Guardians of the Galaxy, I can't remember the guy's name, he played in a lot of comedies, real funny guy. He's the main character. Well, he actually is the son of this demigod. And he almost gets taken out in this one battle scene when his dad just appears out of nowhere, riding on top of the eyeball with like somebody's riding on top of a well or something in the ocean, and essentially that's how he first meets his dad. And he grows up wanting to meet his dad, so he has an imagination that his dad's like David Hasselhoff. So from Knight Rider. So to make a long story short, he finally meets his dad. His dad takes him to his dad's planet that his dad created, and it's called Ego, Planet Ego. What a great name, right? And they take him there in his spaceship slash eyeball, all-seeing eyeball that can fly throughout time and space. And when he gets to his planet Ego with his son and the other Guardians of the Galaxy, I mean, it's just this beautiful planet. And his son says to him, he goes, "Dad, are you God? Am I a God?" And he goes, "Well, not the capital G, little g, son." Very Masonic in there. Deistic, I see. Somebody that's deistic, at least from what I've gathered, just a basic concept. If you are a deist, then you believe there is a supreme creator, a architect of the universe, and that the ultimate God creates a reality and then goes on to go do something else. And then when that reality is created and he goes on to do something else, well, you can do whatever you want with the reality that he created because he's going to do something else anyway. Essentially, in a nutshell. So I'm sure I'll get a lot of comments on that. But I also noticed that this celestial god, which is Kurt Russell, and then his son, which is the main character. What's his name? Pritchard. What's that guy's name? Here, let me tell you real quick. Who is the main character in Guardians of the Galaxy? Like Pritchard or something like that. Chris Pratt. Yeah, Chris Pratt. Should have known that beforehand. But hey, there you go. It's Chris Pratt. So Chris Pratt is essentially, he makes contact with his dad. He finds out he's part God. He finds out that he can manifest whatever he wants. And when he gets to this planet, his dad's like, "Come on, see if you can do it. See if you've got the spark in you." So he gets to this planet and he's like, "Can I manifest stuff out of thin air?" And he does. He starts manifesting stuff out of thin air. So Kurt Russell gets all excited. He's like, "Yes, you can do it. You can do it." And you can just sense something's wrong. And then he's like, "See if you can make a ball." So he manifests this ball. And then they start playing ball back and forth. It's like, makes you think of when you were a kid playing baseball with your dad or tossing a football back and forth. I mean, that's the essence that they were bringing, this old school childhood memories. And, oh, everything's great. Everything's wonderful. I found my dad. I'm a god. We're playing ball on our own planet. Things are great. What could go wrong? And meanwhile, as this is going on and he's really getting accustomed to being God, or being a god, I should say, a demigod on his own planet, the thoughts of Cronos are going through my mind, because Cronos actually devours his children for survival, for regrowth, for renewth, for rejuvenation, essentially. Well, then you go on to find out Kurt Russell talks about his plan as seeding all the planets, and he talks about how he had sex with a whole bunch of different women, had a whole bunch of different kids, but Mr. Pratt is the only one that has that extra spark that's a celestial. So all the other kids were just cannon fodder, and now he's got he's got another celestial to perform what he wants to perform, and that's to rewrite the entire universe in his image. And it starts to happen, and then Chris realizes what's going on, that it's going to destroy all the mortals, and it's going to destroy all the humans. And it's this whole battle of human against angel again. Fallen angels is what I'm sensing, the old school stories that we've been told for years and years and generations. The jealousy of angels of human, and that constant battle. So when Chris rebels, well, his dad flips out and says, fine, I'll just use you as a battery for the next 1,000 years. Lightning strike goes into Chris, and he's like, nah, and he's essentially becomes an energy source. And then all these seeds that Kurt Russell planted throughout the universe starts to grow once he's got his second celestial. And these planets start to overgrow with this weird technology from his seeds that he's planted all throughout the galaxies. And to make a long story short, he doesn't get away with it. But I also wanted to bring up how the eye on the inside of the eye spaceship, when they got in there, it looked like an ear canal. And then when they got to the planet Ego, and they get out of the spaceship, they're hovering around in what looks like a bottom of a mouth, like the bottom tray of a mouth or something like that. Just really strange. They're using like different body parts, I've noticed, for the subliminal programming. Now, there was also, do you remember the bad guy in the previous film? The blue dude? Well, he didn't keep up with the code, right? He didn't do what he was supposed to do. The code was, you can steal whatever you want, just don't kidnap people. Well, he kidnapped people, got busted for it, so Sylvester Stallone in the new one basically exiles him and says, you know what, you didn't keep the code, you're out of here. So the blue dude that was a bad guy in the previous movie is actually kind of a good guy in this movie, and he redeems himself at the end by doing the right thing, saving his stepson, which is Chris Pratt. The reason Chris Pratt is his stepson is because in the previous film, Chris Pratt was actually kind of kidnapped by these blue dudes, and they treated him like shit and freaked him out his whole life, but essentially they did keep him alive. So Chris Pratt's, got a pretty negative outlook of his stepdad, obviously, but he makes up for it at the end by saving his life. And he ends up becoming the martyr and redeeming his past, his past sins. I guess you could call it a good word to put. So I find it very interesting, all the subliminal programming in this film. And I also find it fascinating how I watched this after I've been doing all sorts of research into the cult of Saturn and these nanotechnologies and the possibility of some of this nanotech being kind of like a drone network or a computer network to relay information back to an outside source. And then I started thinking about that recent archetype, that statue, that sculpture that I showed you guys from the Roman era of the lion head wrapped in the serpent on a planet that says X on it and holding the keys to the heaven of the heavens. And I was seeing similarities of the cult of Saturn controlling beings, essentially. These archetypes that might be locked up in Saturn, or Saturn's connection, its vibrational frequencies, have something to do with all this Greek mythos. And symbolically, we're putting it together as best as we can with our monkey minds that we have access to right now. It's all connecting in my eyes. I'm seeing this all connecting. Now, also, I want to bring up the golden people in this film. In my opinion, they're these golden aliens, and they were mimicking Aryans, kind of like the Nazis, in my opinion, is the way they were portraying them. They were stuck up, they were prissy, they were metrosexual. All they cared about was bloodlines. and they kind of portrayed them as inferior in physical and mental abilities. I also noticed in this film that was the underlying theme. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. If you didn't see that, I'd like to know your opinion on that. Also, another thing that connected the Saturn and the cult of Saturn and the possibility of Saturn possibly being a sun at one point in time that I noticed in here, the two suns. Was Saturn once a star, and that combined with our sun also, was our galaxy different at one point in time? Was our star that we know it not a star at one point in time, and Saturn was, and there was some weird manipulation going on? These are just questions I'm asking, guys. But there was a part in the film where Kurt Russell said to his son, there needs to be two celestials in order for this to work. There needs to be two of us in order for these planets that I have seeded around the galaxies to grow. So what if there's some type of symbolic connection there with Saturn and Sol, S-O-L, our sun in our solar system? What if there's some weird manipulation? What if there's some type of metaphorical subliminal message there that we need to unlock? Now, there were several references to the great oceans. And I was wondering if that was in reference to Poseidon, Enki, Leviathan. Yet I saw this archetype not as Enki by any means in this film. It was Cronos. That's what I saw as representation, the demigod Cronos. I also, like I said, I saw a lot of kind of subliminal messages of fallen angels sleeping with women, sacrificing everything in their way, manifesting reality and matter via thought. Oh, and one of the main characters in the film was an alien, and guess what the alien's name was? Mantis. It was a mantis. Didn't look like a mantis alien, but it was called. Her name was Mantis. She had these little things on her head. Now, the code that I talked about, the only way it looks like it can be redeemed is by death in this film. The heart of the planet was the being that spread his seed, Kurt Russell, around the cosmos. And then I think of Greek mythos and astro shamanism and how each planet represents a being, and how these Romans talked about these beings that were representation of the sun, or of the sun as well as the planets. Like Jupiter has a representation of a demigod. Zeus, representation of the sun. Saturn, Mars, the planet of war. There's beings connected to each of these planets. What if each planet in the cosmos, guys, has a being that's attached to that? What if every star out there has a being that's attached to it? We are stars. We are individual stars. This is a microcosm of the macrocosm. Our body is. What if at the higher levels we become planets, we become stars, we become even higher than that? What if we have an opportunity to become entire solar systems and entire galaxies? And then everything within that galaxy, everything within that star, everything within that planet and that orbits around it, we have access to, that we can move our consciousness into that point at any given time that we want to. We can see through the eyes of planets. We can see through the eyes of insects, of microscopic larvae, anything within that paradigm. And the more knowledge we obtain, the more we grow, the more we help, the more karma that comes back to us as well in that aspect. Help others, learn. What's the golden rule? Treat others the way you want to be treated. And then somebody might say, well, what if I want to be treated like shit? Well, maybe that ain't the golden rule for you then, buddy. So a few days prior to this podcast, I got a key in the mail after I started talking about all those podcasts about that serpent wrapped around the lion man with the key to the heavens of the heavens. Now, one thing I do want to bring up too is at the end of the film, even after the good guys won and the Guardians of the Galaxy won, the scavengers, which were, basically you can look at them as like a biker gang, I guess. Sons of Anarchy or something like that, because they're bullies. They really are. They've got a code, yeah, but they're a bunch of bullies. They rob people. They steal. They're, not the kind of people I want to hang out with. Well, make a long story short, at the end, when the blue guy dies, saving his son, well, there's this big ceremony in space. And all of the scavengers come back to, to basically give their accolades and their homage to this guy that passes in the stars. And these different ships like morph into these, remind me of something out of Atari. You know, these weird looking electronic things like pew, 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 pew. And it looks cool. It looks like a big light show, right? But you know what I picked up on that subconsciously? I picked up that even when you do the right thing, even when good prevails, in the shadows, the serpent archons are still always there, orchestrating things, pulling the strings behind the scenes, making things happen, making you think you possibly won one. In reality, they're just waiting for you to do it again so they can feed off of you again in perpetuity. Even though the good guys won, the bad guys still have the archons, and they're still going to go blow shit up. At the end, they're like, yeah, let's go rob something. Let's go steal something. Reminds me, I've only got a few minutes left, and I've got a really good interview here in about 12 minutes with Ronnie from GetTheTea.com. I've been taking this stuff called colostrum, and I love it. This stuff is amazing. It's way better than caffeine. But just to close out, I wanted to bring up, several years ago, I had an experience that I will never forget. It was kind of like the night of terrors, the night of horrors. And I was in a haunted house, and I lived in this house for several years. I found out after I moved out, my neighbors told me the 5 previous couples that lived there before me ended up getting divorces in that house. Yeah, I mean, there's negative energy in that house for sure. That was the house that I told you about that I got that grimoire, that used grimoire, and I could just feel seriously negative energy. And then I got rid of the grimoire, and it was like the energy was lifted off. But something stayed in that house. But something was in there before. And this night, I remember having this vision of like everything in the media, in the mainstream media, like the top conglomerates, the 6 corporations that spew out all of these sitcoms and comedies and even the commercials. Everything that I watched on TV, and I kept changing the channels, it freaked me out, had something dark and twisted and connected to death. It was really freaky. And that was one of those nights that made me realize how dark things are behind the scenes. How much darkness there is hiding in plain sight, just ready to pounce and just suck the goodness out of people. That was a very, very frightening night. And it definitely, that was one of those kind of nights you have that change you, like to the core. It was, how do I put it? It was a tough price to pay for knowledge. Let's put it that way. So anyway, with that said, I feel that we all have the power in ourselves to do what's right and to keep balance in the world and to keep that light, keep that spark going of goodness, of kindness, of I'd say purity, but it's almost as if with all of this stuff around us, all of these different pollution factors in the media, in our environment, in our food, in our water, in virtually every aspect, there's some type of pollution there that we have to filter out. It's tough to stay pure. We need to be very aware of our surroundings, I feel, and question everything. Question everything. Be the change you want to see, folks. LeakProject.com. Sex with women. So he's considered a celestial, a demigod, and he actually even builds his own planet based on thoughts alone. He thinks it into manifestation. He actually manifested his body. And remember how I brought up a couple of days ago on a podcast about how I felt like we were manifested via thought forms, not by a single cell. So that was interesting also. And one of the main characters, one of the Guardians of the Galaxy, I can't remember the guy's name, he played in a lot of comedies, real funny guy. I watch them at certain times after I've done research in other avenues to kind of connect the dots. And the first thing that I noticed in the film was the all-seeing eye. That was a ship. It was a demigod's ship, and it was Kurt Russell that played this demigod. And at the beginning of the film, he's going to different planets and seeding his life essence, essentially. And He's having sex with all sorts of different women, and I'm thinking of the stories that are talked about when the fallen angels come down to earth and have. He's the main character. Well, he actually is the son of this demigod, and he almost gets taken out in this one battle scene when his dad just appears out of nowhere, riding on top of the eyeball with like somebody's riding on top of a well or something in the ocean, and essentially that's how he first meets his dad. And he grows up wanting to meet his dad, and so he has an imagination that his dad's like David Hasselhoff. So from Knight Rider. So to make a long story short, he finally meets his dad. Hey everybody, Rex Bear League Project, how the heck are you? I watched Guardians of the Galaxy 2 last night, and I want to give a quick analysis on it. Now, this is definitely going to be a spoiler, so if you haven't seen the film yet and you don't want to know about it, go ahead and watch something else. For those of you that do want to see the connections that I saw with the cult of Saturn, with nanotechnologies, with transhumanism, with Cronos, the god of time, it's pretty deep. It was definitely far out, and it seems like when I watch these films, Dad takes him to his dad's planet that his dad created, and it's called Ego, Planet Ego. What a great name, right? And they take him there in his spaceship slash eyeball, all-seeing eyeball that can fly throughout time and space. And when he gets to his planet Ego with his son and the other Guardians of the Galaxy, I mean, it's just this beautiful planet. And his son says to him, he goes, "Dad, are you God? Am I a god?" And he goes, "Well, not the capital G, little g, son." Very Masonic in there. Deistic, I see. Somebody that's deistic.